So let's move on to question number 2, which comes from Meredith. Meredith asks, I tend to practice yoga daily, and I like the idea of trying more formal breath work with my practice. Do you guys have any tips on how to integrate breath work into yoga? So I find this to be a really great question. And the reason being is because, number one, I love yoga. Number two, I am all about like, how can I kill as many birds with one stone as possible? Because I value time and I have a lot going on. So there's a lot of people who ask me kind of like, when do I do a lot of my breath work? And I'm like, a lot of times it's in the sauna when I'm stretching and doing yoga poses. I'm doing like 3 or 4 things all at once. I'm very mindful about everything that I'm doing, but I'm doing them. And so I'm curious kind of how you coach people, Patrick, or what you have to say about integrating just breath work in general, and then maybe how you incorporate some of your practices in there. Because one thing to clarify too, especially if people are not maybe as aware of what yoga actually is. Yoga is not just about, stretching and manipulating the body and contortionism. Like, there are a lot of components to yoga, and one central component to yoga is indeed breath work. So I'm curious what you have to say on this one.
I think yoga has an enormous potential to adopt breathing exercises because so many people attend yoga to help deal with stress
Yes.
and anxiety and panic disorder and respiratory issues. And oftentimes the people who are going to yoga, they don't necessarily want to go to a gym. They don't like getting onto a treadmill, which is fair enough. And they're using yoga as a physical workout. There's a couple of points in this, Jay, because I suppose if we broke down breathing to 3 dimensions, the biochemical dimension, which is focusing on improving tolerance to carbon dioxide, the depth of breathing, focusing on the biomechanics, and also resonance frequency breathing, changing the case of breathing to stimulate the vagus nerve. And then any posture or movement in yoga, then you could focus on some movement and bring in exercises to target the biochemistry during that movement.
Right.
So say, for example, you're doing a really, really slow movement. And as you're doing that really, really slow movement, you have such subtle breathing in through the nose. And then coming out of the movement, you have such a subtle, relaxed and a slow, gentle exhalation to underbreathe during the movement so that you're not just focusing on bringing your awareness into movement, but also onto the breath. And by reducing breathing volume, it will help to improve circulation and it will help to improve oxygen delivery to those working muscles. And also, by increasing blood flow to the brain, it can have a very calming effect.
Yes.
It can also help to open up the airways. And also, it will help then to lengthen the individual's breath hold time. And by reducing their ventilatory response to carbon dioxide, their respiratory rate then will go slower during the day. So I often think of, you might have a beginner to yoga, and they're doing yoga because they want to do something beneficial for them. But they are breathing fast and hard with the upper chest.
Yeah.
And the yoga instructor might be asking them to take these full big breaths. But this student they don't need to be taking full big breaths. What they need exercises to target the biochemistry to improve their tolerance to CO2. Because when you have a better tolerance to the accumulation of carbon dioxide, the respiratory rate naturally slows down. I don't believe that we can change the respiratory rate by focusing solely on the respiratory rate. But if we focus on minute ventilation, and we reduce minute ventilation, and the body adapts to reduction in minute ventilation, the respiratory rate will naturally slow down. And we can also assess a beginner student in terms of breathing in yoga to an advanced student in yoga in terms of breathing by measuring their breath hold time.
Right.
And this was traditionally how it was done. Because an experienced student of yoga had naturally a long breath hold time, and they could suspend the breath for a prolonged period of time. They could reduce their respiratory rate down to maybe 3 breaths per minute, 2 breaths per minute, or even 1 breath per minute. Now, if you have an advanced yoga practitioner, they are able to breathe in really subtly for maybe 20 seconds and breathe out very subtly for 40 seconds. That individual has mastery over the breath. And I like the point that you make that yoga, it's not just about movement, it's actually mastery of the mind.
Yes.
But how do you get mastery of the mind unless you have mastery over the breath.
Sure. Yeah, I like that.
So then, for example, then, and I think like we have our own yoga teacher training. In terms of, we have Anastasis, who is an experienced, he used to be special forces, and then he worked in finance. And I think as part of his karma to repay into society, he now teaches yoga, which is absolutely wonderful.
It's great.
And he's brought breathing exercises in with that. And it's just really the basic understanding. It's not that we want to change any of the asanas or anything like that, but it's about tweaking how to guide breathing exercises during the movement. So some breathing exercises you can bring into some postures in terms of focusing on the biochemistry. And there are other postures then you're going to be focusing on the biomechanics. You're having the student breathe slow and breathe low. And then you could actually then deliberately, with the instructor, guiding the student to breathing in maybe for 5 seconds and breathing out for 5 seconds, and breathing in for 5 seconds and out for 5 seconds to target the autonomic nervous system. So in actual fact, I would see yoga in the future as being a sequence of exercises for the body, but also a sequence of exercises for the breath, which is combined with the movement.
Sure.
And with that, then, we are helping to train the mind. There is an enormous potential here. And, you know, I don't want ever to criticize. Sometimes when I say something about breathing and yoga, people kind of come to me saying, well, you know, it's about taking the full big breaths or whatever. Our yoga instructors actually have it right. And we've done our own little research, because this is an area that I'm writing about at the moment. The next book that I'm going to, I'm writing with Anastasis. It's a book called Breathing. It's Breathing for Yoga.
Interesting. That's great.
And it's literally just marrying those two together. And we did very simple research. We went in on YouTube and we looked at the breathing techniques that were being instructed by yoga instructors. And 7 out of 10 involved taking these fuller and bigger breaths. Now, the only issue with taking fuller and bigger breaths is that it could be sacrificing the biochemistry. That if you're intentionally asking your students to take these full big breaths, and if you can hear people breathe inside the yoga studio, if you can hear people breathe during light movement, there is a risk that the people are breathing too much air and blowing off too much carbon dioxide, which in turn is increasing their sensitivity to the gas CO2. And this is the opposite to the original development of yoga, because